The best history lessons often come from protest, forcing us to engage with a past which has been intentionally erased by the powerful. Now, King Charles III is currently visiting Australia, which to this day has retained the British crown as a head of state. Instead of electing someone, I don't know, Australian, as the symbol of Australia, I know, radical idea, eh? Now, in Britain itself, support for the monarchy has been in decline for a while, with younger Britons now more supportive of an elected head of state than an unelected multimillionaire selected arbitrarily on the basis of the family they're born into. Australia itself had a referendum back in 1999 on becoming a republic, which tragically was lost by a margin of around 55% to 45%. But that was largely because Australians didn't like the alternative then on offer, which was the president being elected by a two-thirds majority in parliament rather than being directly elected by the people. So that wasn't actually a show of enthusiasm for monarchism, which polling suggests most Australians support a republic in principle consistently. Now, during his visit to Australia, along with Queen Camilla, as he addressed MPs and senators in Parliament House, alongside the Labour Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who notably is himself a lifelong Republican, although he said leading the Australian delegation for the King's coronation was one of the honours of his life. But the King was heckled by Lidia Thorpe, an Indigenous senator for Victoria, who was previously in the Green Party. Let's have a listen.
You committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back. Give us what you stole from us. Our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land. Give us a treaty. We want a treaty in this country. You are a genocider. This is not your land. This is not your land. You are not my kids. You are not our kids.
Courageous and righteous stuff there from Lidia Thorpe, who previously worked as an Aboriginal employment advisor and is a survivor of domestic violence. She says, this is not your country, quite literally true, that you committed genocide against our people. Give us our land back. Give us what you stole from us, our bones, our skulls, our babies, our people. You destroyed our land. Give us a treaty. We want a treaty in this country. You are a genocidalist. Now, you can also hear her shouting with admirably directness, fuck the colony. Now, the British Empire, which this country has never had a reckoning with, offers no accurate education, this country, about what it was whatsoever. Indeed, the British Empire is barely discussed, except to whitewash its various crimes. The British Empire is defined by blood, theft, subjugation, and indeed, genocide. The genocide of Indigenous Australians took place over the course of 2 centuries, from when the colonisation of Australia by Britain began in the late 18th century. It's not known exactly when the Aborigines came to Australia. Some think between 45 and 50,000 years ago, or there's 65,000 to 80,000 years ago. There were up to 950,000 Aborigines in Australia when the British invaded. Now, for Aborigines, land is of central importance, considered akin to a mother, and that land was stolen. The British Empire massacred Aborigines en masse, with a recent 8-year project finding that around half of all the massacres carried out by the police and other forces belonging to the state. That's half what were committed by them, and the rest committed by settlers with the complicity of the state. If you read about these massacres, they're truly hideous, including pregnant women and babies being shot, men and women and children being driven off gorges to their deaths, the deliberate poisoning of flour given to Aboriginal people, as well as rape and torture. In the 1830s, the Solicitor General of New South Wales, Alfred Stephen, declared his solution for the, in quotes, Aboriginal problem, as he called it. He said, if the colony could not protect its convict servants from Aboriginal attack without extermination, then I say boldly and broadly, exterminate. Not exactly subtle. There were bounties introduced, £5 for an adult Aboriginal person, a significant amount at the time, and £2 for a child. In the Forest River Massacre of 1926, a police party killed 11 people and then burned their bodies in makeshift ovens. Aborigines were driven, of course, from their land. Children were forcibly taken from their families, with the authorities seizing them between 1910 and as recently as the 1970s, the so-called stolen generations. While there was, at the same time, a direct assault on their culture, with children forbidden from speaking their language and punished if they did so. In today's Australia, it's reported that over 4 in 10 Aboriginal people in remote Australian communities go without food, while 30% of Indigenous households are in income poverty. Aboriginal adults make up 31% of Australia's prison population, even though they make up about 3.8% of the overall population. A decade ago, it was estimated that 1 in every 14 Western Aboriginal Australian Aboriginal men were imprisoned. Indeed, Australia imprisoned Aboriginal adult males with incarceration rates comparable to or worse than that of black imprisonment in apartheid South Africa. Now, Lidia Thorpe here refers to a treaty, a call for treaties to be made with the Indigenous people. It's striking that, for example, New Zealand and Canada have signed such treaties. Australia is just one example of the grave crimes of the British Empire. Take India, for example. That was considered, of course, the jewel in the crown of the empire before Britain conquered it. It had a share of the world economy of a fifth, nearly equivalent to all of Europe combined. But by the time it won its independence, that was less than 4%. By the end of the 19th century, India was the world's biggest buyer of British exports and offered extremely well-paid work for British civil servants, all paid for by India, which was treated as a cash cow for Britain. As the book Late Victorian Holocaust by the late Mike Davis found, between 12 and 29 million Indians died of unnecessary famines under British rule, while millions of tons of wheat were exported to Britain as famine raged. So-called relief camps were set up, but their inhabitants were barely fed and they nearly all died. The last such famine in India was under British rule in 1943, when up to 4 million Bengalis starved to death when Winston Churchill diverted food to already well-fed British soldiers. Churchill said the starvation of anyway underfed Bengalis is less serious than that of sturdy Greeks. He said, "I hate Indians. They are a beastly people with a beastly religion." He wrote that to the Secretary of State for India, Leopold Amery. In any case, he said the famine was their fault because they were breeding like rabbits. Well, you can see why Winston Churchill is denounced correctly as a violent racist. There was Kenya, the so-called Mau Mau uprising in the 1950s against British rule. Thousands of the Kikuyu tribe were driven into detention camps, which Harvard historian Caroline Elkins called Britain's Gulag. She thinks up to 100,000 people could have died as recently as the 1950s. But the reality of British Empire is erased, even though the consequences are still felt today. We can't understand any of the injustices of our time without looking, of course, at this history. One striking example in the here and now is Palestine. The British Empire having promised the land of Palestine to the Zionist movement in 1917, when at the time the Jewish population of Palestine was less than 10%. Now, today we can see, like Australia, a settler state waging a genocidal war against the Palestinians in an effort to steal their land and to colonise it. Well, we can't address the great injustices of the present without looking to the past. So here's 3 cheers to Lidia Thorpe for her courageous and educational intervention. Please like and subscribe to leave your thoughts, your comments. Sorry, slightly weird setup. I'm in a Premier Inn abroad doing some work. This is the best setup I could do with this notice. But leave your comments, your thoughts, subscribe, listen to the podcast. I'll speak to you soon.